Derivative rule 2. If we actually have an x in it, things get a little bit more interesting rather than the derivative of every constant is just 0, which I could prove doing the 4-step process, and you would probably hate it or skip that part of the video, so I'm not going to do that. We don't want to do that 4-step process, even though it does always work. We've noticed that there is a pattern if you have x to any power. So if you have y equals x to the n, taking the derivative of that. Some people did the 4-step process over and over again just to realize that there's a shortcut. That always works. Taking the derivative of y, we would call it y prime, and we would bring down our power n and subtract 1 to find our new power. N x to the n minus 1. Looks confusing, but it's really not too bad to have to do, and a whole heck of a lot better than that 4-step process. So looking at our first example, it's called f of x, so we want to label our derivative f prime of x. The derivative of 2x, we're going to bring down the 2 and raise x to a new power by subtracting 1. Well, 2 minus 1 is just 1, which normally we don't even write the first power of x, so we'd probably just type it into WebAssign as 2x. We don't need to type in the first power. Let's do that again. The derivative of x to the 99, well, it's called g, so the derivative is going to be labeled g prime of x. Bring down the 99 power and raise x to a new power by subtracting 1, x to the 98. There we took another derivative, so much faster than the 4-step process. Next one, h of x is going to have a derivative called h prime of x. And we're going to bring down our power 5 and raise x to the what? 4. Perfect. Bring down the power, subtract 1 for the new power is how I would say this rule. So calculus is nice. The rules don't change. Bring down the power and subtract 1 for the new power. The only way that we could make this harder is by having the algebra be harder. So our next two examples are the same exact rule, but algebra makes it so that it's difficult to find the derivative. So we have f of x is 1 over x to the 8th. So we just need to take a moment to rewrite this. We need to look back at our very first page of notes where we talked about what happens when we have something down in the denominator. What type of exponent was that? You can flip back to that page 2 of the notes. That was x to the negative 8. Negative exponents belong in the denominator. So we write it as x to the negative 8. And now that we rewrote it, we're ready to take the derivative. So even though we did work and it feels like we should be done, we didn't even take the derivative yet. All we did was algebra, which says if it's in the denominator, it's a negative exponent. To take the derivative, we bring down our power and subtract 1 for the new power. What's negative 8 minus 1? It's negative 9. There's our derivative. Okay, let's do that again. Derivatives, the rule doesn't change. Bring down the power, subtract 1 from the new power. This one, again, algebra is going to make it hard. We have to rewrite it first. A root is going to be rewritten as a fraction, and it's always power on top, root on bottom. So this is going to be x to the first, and the square root is the second root. So we have x to the 1/2. Algebra is tricky because it switches up. If it's in the denominator, it's negative. If it's in the root, it's to a fraction exponent. But the calculus stays the same. I have not taken the derivative, which is going to be labeled g prime of x, until I've brought down the power, 1/2, and subtracted 1 for the new power. You might not be able to subtract fractions in your head, and that's totally fine, judgment-free zone. I'm going to do the work off to the side just in case you can't do it in your head. 1/2 minus 1 is the same thing as 1/2 minus, you want to write it in the same denominator. So we want to write it as the denominator of 2, which is 2 over 2 is the same thing as subtracting 1. Okay, so 1/2 minus 1 is the same thing as minusing 2 over 2, because that is 1. 2 divided by 2 is 1. And then you get to keep your same denominator and do 1 minus 2, which is negative 1. All right, 1/2 minus 2/2 is negative 1/2 for my new exponent. And we're going to do some more practice with fractions. So if you're like, I hate subtracting fractions, we'll do some more, and I'll always show my work off to the side for you. There's our second rule. Bring down the power, subtract 1 for the new power.